once I started doing that, Kurt, I thought this is what I got to do. I think I was born to be a bubblehead. So 84, I hung up sorta my physical therapy hat and put on my scuba fins, and I've been doing it full time ever since.
Episode number 379, Scott Taylor and scuba diving as an adventure sport for people with disabilities.
This episode is sponsored in part by Canaday Pet Food. You know your dog is the best part of your adventure, and a great way to keep him happy and healthy is by feeding him the best pet food. That's why you need to check out Canaday Pet Food. Canaday is an independent and family-owned pet food company who uses the same care and the same quality ingredients they want for their own pets when making their pet foods. Check out Canaday.com/podcast. You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 Tech. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there.
Hey friends, Kurt here. Today is a revisit. It's a repeat of an older episode that was from a couple of years ago. I really like this one about scuba diving. We're doing this as part of our kind of reorganization on how the Adventure Sports Podcast works. And let me explain that. We do a new show on Mondays. We also do a repeat show now on Thursdays. And we are doing brand new shows on Patreon. So if you become a patron of the Adventure Sports Podcast, helping us to survive as a show, you get to hear not only the shows that are only for Patreon members, you get to know that you're helping to support the show. You also will have opportunities to do things like co-host a show if you would like, and win fun gear that we review on the show from time to time, and a whole lot of other things. Please become a patron of the Adventure Sports Podcast. Help keep the show alive, and then you can enjoy all the Patreon content as well. Thank you very much, and enjoy today's show with Scott Taylor. Today is all about scuba diving, and we have not done a scuba show for a long time, so I'm really excited. I don't know if any of you know, but I'm actually a scuba diver, and I have Scott Taylor with us, who is scuba diver extraordinaire. So Scott grew up in Colorado, and his father-in-law ran a scuba shop. So Scott became a physical therapist. He spent 4 years in the Air Force, and he started diving in 1970, and in 1984, he took over the scuba business full-time, and he is the owner-operator of A1 Scuba and Travel Aquatics Center, and I'll let him explain the title there because it's kind of interesting. They have certified thousands of people to scuba dive, and so Scott is here to tell us about scuba, about adventure travel, and Scott, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks, Kurt. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, you bet, man. This is going to be fun. We started talking before I pressed record here and almost did a full show just because we're having so much fun chatting about this, and so now we get to redo everything we just said.
Cool. That'll be fun. You're making me sound old, though. You gave a lot of dates out there, so if anybody's a mathematician, well, I am old. What can I say?
Well, you're kind of like me. We're celebrating multiples of our 30th.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, incremental multiples, not 30 multiples, but
there you go.
We'll move on. So, Scott, why scuba? Why did you start diving, and why do you work in scuba full time?
All right, well, thanks. I want to tie it into my interest in working with people with disabilities. As it ends up, when I got into scuba diving, I was also volunteering in high school with a handicap swimming program and got into the scuba, and I immediately thought how much fun this would be for people with disabilities. So fast forward a few years after when I was in the military, I did some volunteer work with some handicap swim programs. Went to college, as you said, became a physical therapist, and it wasn't long after I graduated that I talked to my father-in-law and said, I'd like to take some of my patients in the pool on scuba. I think this would be kind of cool. Get them out of their wheelchair and off crutches, braces, or prosthetic devices, and let's give it a try. And it was an overnight hit. And you and I kind of talked about it before the show started. What I quickly discovered is that diving, scuba diving in particular, it's the great equalizer. It puts people in a medium that all but eliminates gravity. And so now you can discard all of those items I talked about earlier. Gravity, which was restrictive out of the water, is absent in the water. And now you can start moving body parts that you might not have moved very well or at all out of the water, and you can propel from point A to point B without the restrictions of a device. And that for me was just this huge epiphany. And so once I started doing that, Kurt, I thought, this is what I got to do. I think I was born to be a bubblehead. So 84, I hung up sorta my physical therapy hat and put on my scuba fins, and I've been doing it full time ever since.
That's cool. So you work with Craig Hospital here in Colorado to continue giving people with physical challenges an opportunity to try scuba and find out what it's all about.
I do. That's where I last worked as a PT, and happily left in good terms. Didn't get a pink slip, and started bringing patients from Craig to our dive store. We're kind of lucky we have an indoor pool, so started bringing them to our store. It's evolved now, many years later, to a monthly program where patients, whether inpatients or maybe they're here for a reevaluation or a first-time evaluation from out of state, are given an opportunity to try a variety of activities. And Craig has this incredible therapeutic rec department where they introduce, you can pick an activity you probably have talked about on the show in the past. They select these activities, give people the opportunity. Ours happens to be scuba. They have the transportation made available, bring patients over to our store. We're quite lucky. We have a large building, and we have a 2-level building, so we installed an elevator. People wheel in, and immediately they're in an environment where our staff is friendly and greets them, and they've experienced some of these things through various in-services themselves. So it's a warm and friendly environment. They come with peers, other people with disabilities, some of the staff members from Craig. Get on the elevator, go downstairs, and then they head to our pool. So we're able to take them into a water environment in a really fun way. We have, I mentioned to you earlier, we have a lift over our pool that Craig donated, had installed and donated, so we can get people out of their wheelchairs or into the water quite easy. And then from there, we do a Discover Scuba, just like we would anywhere around the country. People do Discover Scuba diving experiences. We have a staff who volunteers their time. These are phenomenal people who've had some training. They're scuba divers themselves, and we get these folks in the water, and the only intent we have is to give people an experience. And hopefully through this experience, it gives them an attitude of enablement, where started out saying, I can't. Suddenly, you did what? You went scuba diving? Are you kidding me? And they had fun. As I mentioned earlier, we've eliminated gravity. They do an activity, get out of the water, and I'll tell you, the smiles are just priceless. And I think a lot of people have stretch marks from smiling so much after their experience. And whether or not somebody goes on to become a certified diver at that point or not is really not our intent. It's our intent to, as I said, change an attitude. I can now, as opposed to I can't. And I could ramble on forever about the testimonials and the stories of people who have just had nothing but positive accolades about their experience. And it's kind of a new mindset, new attitude change. And again, I have to give Craig so much credit for providing that opportunity, whether it's scuba or other experiences. And we just feel very fortunate to be a part of that whole process.
You know what I love about what you were just telling us there, Scott, is how people go from an attitude of I can't to I just did that.
Yeah.
And when someone has suffered some sort of a traumatic injury, it's real easy to get stuck in that I can't world. And, we mentioned Matt Feeney to each other earlier, and Adaptive Adventures, and how they take people and say, look, you can.
Absolutely.
And when people with any sort of a physical challenge find out that there are devices, there are mobilities, there are ways to do everything now. If you want to do it, you can do it. And I love it because you're waking people up to that.
Well, there's so many great groups of people in our country and beyond who really want to get people motivated and encourage them. I have a friend in Mexico, Leo Morales, and Leo lost his leg to cancer about 6 or 7 years ago now. And Leo was extremely depressed, was ready to sort of end things. And through a friend, through his brother actually, he got into scuba diving. And I'll tell you what, Kurt, it changed his life. He is now the record holder for deep diving in the country of Mexico, somebody with a disability. He and I and a few other people, Missy Franklin and a couple other folks, we were involved with a documentary about diving and the enabling part of diving. It's called The Current. Kurt Miller is the director of the Warren Miller film family. And I'll tell you what, Leo, just to hear him talk about diving and what it's done for him, as a veteran, I'm quite fortunate. I have worked with a number of veterans. As we both know, as we all know, PTSD, combat PTSD is terrible, and there's been suggestions of multiple suicides done daily. 22 I'm hearing a day, and that could be simply rumor, but there's a lot of need for therapies out there, and there's a number of groups in our country who are taking veterans with PTSD and getting them into SCUBA. There's a group called Waves, for example, out on the West Coast here in California, who are taking veterans now and changing their lives, changing their attitudes through SCUBA, of all crazy things. So, yeah, sorry, I'm rambling, but I think it's a great recreational activity. It's a very therapeutic, exciting adventure activity, too.
You know what's funny about that, Scott? We used to almost always ask the question at the end of our show, so what good is it? What are you doing for the planet? And you answered it first. And really, it's amazing to find out with almost any adventure sport, the benefits that are available to people that get involved with it, and the way that the sport can be used to challenge people, to draw people out, to give them a new perspective. Let's talk about perspective. There's one for you. Scuba diving is a completely different perspective. What is it like to be under the water?
Well, Kurt, it's pretty cool. I've already sort of given you the whole freedom spiel, but I think to see the stuff, I mean, when I've been within inches of whale sharks, massive critters underwater. I've dove with many, many sharks, still have all my appendages, all my toes, etc. I feel blessed to see these, and little tiny critters too. I've traveled from many countries across the earth to just go scuba diving. So the colors, the critters that you see, it's mind-boggling. Again, dating myself, I'm kind of the old Jacques Cousteau era guy. He's who really got me going, the underwater world of Jacques Cousteau. I'm sure some of the listeners can relate to that. Or Mike Nelson in Sea Hunt. I mean, I was one of those. I love those. All the knife fights and the spear gun stuff. We don't do that, but I thought it was kind of cool at the time. And the James Bond movies always have those cool dive scenes. I think it's just this underwater adventure where we're not talking, we're hearing, we're seeing, we're doing, we're experiencing something that 75% of our planet's water, and to be able to go underwater and encounter that is what a privilege that is.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't agree more. We were joking about how much scuba has changed. And, Scott, I want to tell the story that I told you I was going to tell. I've told it on the show once before, but it's worth telling twice, and then you can tell everybody how it's not like that.
Sure. Can't wait.
So I learned to dive from a buddy who was an avid diver years ago, and he was old school. He learned Navy SEAL methods, and that was pretty hardcore. But I went through all the manuals. He orally tested me on it. He put some scuba gear on me and said, let's go. And we went down to 70 feet, and I had 120 cubic feet of air on my back, which is more than a sport diver would normally carry. But we went down to 70 feet, and I sucked a full 120 cubes down and ran out of air on my first dive at 70 feet, and then had to do a free ascent. And that was in kind of a dark, murky lake. I mean, it was an amazing experience, and I had a ton of fun doing it. But that's not the way it's taught these days.
No, hallelujah. I mean, you're right. Back when I learned in the late 60s when I started, it was all hairy-chested guys. And, it was like Henry Ford. What color? You can have any color piece of equipment you want as long as it's black.
Right.
So it was all that black, heavy, bulky dive gear. And it was a sport that evolved from the military. It was the Navy SEALs out there. It was all those, wartime activities. And then all of a sudden, we started seeing this as a recreational activity. And of course, when that happens, you got to change your procedure. So when I learned, it was ripping gear off and turning your air off and spinning you underwater. It wasn't let's see if we can get somebody to pass. It was failure. It's how can we weed them out?
Right.
Once again, kind of that military mentality. And thank God it changed, because even though I loved it, I was 17, so I was all about that harassment stuff. But by today's standards, you want your kids to dive. We spoke about that. Kids don't want that. People don't want that kind of harassment. They want a family or an individual activity they can enjoy. So it has really evolved to a very, I don't want it to sound sedentary either, because I think there's a lot of excitement to scuba, but now it's methodical. And so you learn about diving. I call it a 3-step process. So first step is you learn about the activity through some media, whether it's buying a book or through an online e-learning process. We're a PADI, P-A-D-I, Professional Association of Diving Instructors facility, and PADI's the biggest in the world training organization. But to learn to dive, it's like driving a car. You have to be licensed. So you go through this process of learning about it. As I said, step 1, the media. And that takes, as much time as you want. You can take your iPad with you. You can take any device, your iPhone, and download this program and read it and study it and take some quizzes online. And then the next step is to come to a dive center, in our case, and we have a pool. So you have some time in the classroom reviewing concepts, not reteaching everything. I almost hate to use the word classroom. It's knowledge development. So we develop some knowledge or enhance it a little bit, try to make it fun. And then we get in the pool. And then we do a bunch of skills in the pool. And you and I talked about earlier, a lot of from assembling the equipment to some what-if skills. What if I got water in my mask? Or what if I was smiling so big at that critter that my regulator dropped out of my mouth? How do I put it back in and clear the water? How do I adjust things underwater? What if your situation? We actually talk about what if you didn't monitor your pressure gauge, like a gas gauge on a car, and you ran out of air or gas. What would you do? We go through some exercises on at least letting you feel what that experience is like underwater. We let you know. We don't surprise you. We're going to turn your air off, look at your pressure gauge, watch the air diminish, feel what it's like for it to run out, signal to your buddy that you're now out of air using a hand signal, and a good hand signal, not a nasty one. And then you'll share air using one of a couple of different techniques. So a lot of the what if stuff is in the pool through 2, 3, or 4 pool sessions. And then you apply all that stuff in the third step, during the third step. And the third step is to go to an open water site. And that could be a lake, in our case, or a quarry. We have a wonderful Denver downtown aquarium we partnered with, and I can talk more about that later and get you started. Or you go to the ocean. And so now you do 4 open water scuba dives where you repeat many of the skills learned in the pool over 4 separate dives. And once done, you are then a certified diver. So some paperwork is done, and you celebrate, jump up and down. And now, unlike a driver's license where you have to have it renewed, now your diver's license is good for life. So that's sort of the process. If I may, that could take as long as you want it to. Back when I learned, it was weeks. Oh my God. Well, we all know that life passes us by if you do anything for too long anymore. It's just too many demands. So we have a weekend program. You can study at home, as I already said. We can get you in the pool over the weekend a few times. We can even start your open water dives at the downtown aquarium. So that's very popular or traditionally there's week evenings where you go 3 or 4 nights during the week to learn. So it isn't the weeks that some people might think. It can be a matter of days, quite honestly.
Oh, that's fun.
It is cool.
So you mentioned the aquarium, and I'm glad you said it twice. The first time you said aquarium, the sound cut out for just a second.
Oh.
So I want to emphasize that A1 Scuba gets to dive in Denver's aquarium.
Pretty cool.
That is awesome.
Isn't that neat? I have got to tell you, the Denver Downtown Aquarium is owned by Landry's Corporation, and I'm sure people have heard names like the Chart House and various steakhouses and the Rainforest Cafe and et cetera. Well, there's some 300 restaurants owned by Landry's. They also own about 5 aquariums, one in Las Vegas and a few others. The Denver Aquarium, when they purchased it several years back, their goal was to rejuvenate this because it was prior owned by some other folks, didn't do well. And so they came in, invested several $1 million into this incredible facility. And one of the mandates out of their headquarters out of Texas was, let's start a public diver program. And so happily, because of our previous affiliation with the founders of that downtown aquarium, who I knew quite well, we were contacted and we sat down with the powers to be. And I'm happy to say, some 12 years later and 30,000 people later, we have now taken and exposed people to this immersion experience at the aquarium, whether snorkeling in one of the cool exhibits with a lot of cool critters, or scuba diving in one of 4 different exhibits. And we can actually take that step 3 and do their first 2 open water training dives at the downtown aquarium. So no driving, at least not much, great visibility, incredible critters. I always jokingly go into classes and say hello and thank you. And I always, how many of you are doing your open waters at the aquarium? And they'll raise their hand. I'll go, well, there is a downside. And you kind of get this grimace on their face. I'll say, you're never going to see that many cool critters ever again up close. So then they smile, of course. It is kind of true. You never will. So what a great way to begin an activity in sort of ideal circumstance, like going skiing on an indoor ski hills that they have around the country now, and get started on the right ski or the right fin correctly. And that's what we get to do.
It's nice to have a safe, controlled environment where people can get a feel for it. And like any other skill, scuba diving requires some experience for it to start to feel normal and natural and kind of automatic. And that's what you want. You want to know what to do. You know, you don't want to be surprised and not know what to do when you're diving. And what a neat thing to be able to do it at the aquarium. That's so cool.
Yeah, it is a great activity.
Dogs make the best partners for outdoor adventures. Good food keeps your dog happy and healthy for those big days. So feed your pets Canidae. Canidae is an independent and family-owned pet food company who uses the same care and the same quality ingredients they want for their own pets when making their pet foods. In keeping with their commitment to pets and their people, Canidae has taken the first steps at Canidae Farms to getting involved in growing the ingredients that they use. Go to Canidae.com/podcast to try Canidae for free by requesting a free sample, and you'll get other special offers too. That's CANIDAE.com/podcast. Again, that's Canidae.com/podcast.
Here in Colorado, where I am, we have one of the largest number of divers per capita in the country. And I'm always asked, why? Why is that? And, well, it's because of A1. No, just kidding.
It might be.
I wish it were. I have a lot of competitors, and I have a lot of great competitors, so I sure wouldn't diss any of them by any stretch. I think it's Coloradans are adventuresome, outgoing people. They love to do indoor and outdoor activities, and with so much available to us here, our aquarium and other things that I've mentioned, and the DIA. Let's face it, you can get DIA, hopefully some way you can get there by public transit, and you can get to wherever your destination is. You can head to the beach in a matter of hours in some cases and be scuba diving. So that's why we're so fortunate. We have so many great opportunities here in Colorado.
Yeah, I think you're right. And in the wintertime when the snow's not very good, which usually it is, but if the snow's not very good, then people like to have that alternate activity, especially when the winter starts to get long and they want to soak up some sun anyway. What better thing to do than to jump a plane for some beach somewhere and do some diving?
Oh, I'll tell you, we all need a vitamin D hit every now and then, don't we? And you're right.
I do.
Those short days in December just drive me bonkers.
They get a little long. Those short days get long.
Oh, man, they do, don't they? How depressing is that? So, heck, you get a quick fix, head down to Cozumel for 4 or 5 days, get feeling pretty good about life again, recharge, come home and do whatever you do, and then go back again on another day. So, as you hear, doesn't take much time to learn to dive. I think it's affordable. We should talk about that. And then you're off and diving, whether it's by yourself. What a great family activity. My kids dive. I've got grandkids now again. I'm old. I've got a couple of grandkids that I just started to introduce to diving. We took them to Cozumel here a few weeks ago. They had a blast. And wow, how cool is that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's fun.
We get a lot of friends. It's kind of funny. We do a lot of group travel. We have a travel agency here at our store. And so we do approximately a group trip a month. It averages out that way. And we go to from the Caribbean to the other side of the world, to the South Pacific. And the friendships, here's people that have a common interest of an activity, find out that they're very similar in so many ways. And now they're sharing stories and fun, and they're diving on the other side of the world together. Is that cool?
Oh, I love it. That's something that we often find out about adventure sports is they build a community too, because people have a common interest. It's just a wonderful thing.
I agree.
So you're telling us about these great destinations, but you got to take us a little bit farther than that. So tell us about an experience scuba diving that you just thought was amazing. Take us there so we can get a feel for what it's really like.
All right. Well, people are always asking my wife and I, what's your favorite place? Where is your favorite place? And again, we've been quite blessed over the years, and there would be people to argue with me. We love the Philippines. We have now been to the Philippines many times, and there's a variety of reasons, and it's not all diving. One, it's the people. I love the people. You know what's cool? I digress. But what we've discovered is whether you go to Cozumel or to the Bahamas or the Red Sea or Indonesia or wherever it might be, people are pretty darn cool. If you watch television, I won't pick on a station, but if you watch television, unfortunately, I think we're led to believe differently. And so when we get to these places, the smiles, the hugs, the friendliness, we're tourists. We are spending our money. Yeah, they appreciate that. But the sincerity of it all, the simplicity. And so here we are in this country, and the people could not be more welcoming. And the Philippines, for Lynn and I, my wife and I, we have just been blown away by that. Then you go underwater on holy mackerel, and you think the Caribbean's cool, and it is, but all of a sudden, it almost night and day. The diversity from tiny little stuff, the weirdest stuff you've ever seen in your life, to big stuff like whale sharks. And I kind of like the big stuff. I like manta rays and whale sharks and sharks in general. And I think that's, for me, what I love. And there's one particular dive site in the Philippines that we go to. And here's the crazy part. It's a snorkel dive. It's not even a scuba dive. But the locals have discovered that the whale sharks like to come in. They eat krill, which is this tiny little teeny nothing critter, millions of them, and they hand feed the whale sharks. So they're sitting on this little cutout boat on the surface. They have people on the boats, visitors who have come to see these, and then we jump in off our dive boats, get in and snorkel around. And so now I'm not kidding, I've got a video clip of 9 whale sharks in this area in one complete panoramic shot that was just blown my mind. I'm as close to that as I am my computer right now in front of me. So a matter of a couple of feet, watching a vertically positioned whale shark 40 feet long being fed krill. And I mean, it's like a siphon. The water coming in their mouth is horrendous. You don't want to get too close. I think you get sucked into their mouth. Then you're too tiny, like my wife's is little. It's that cool, and it's magic. Here you are with one of God's greatest creatures, there face to face, experiencing something that you read in a book or watch on a movie, but you're doing it. And
oh yeah.
I could pontificate forever on those kinds of encounters. Sea lion activity. We did some great white shark diving in South Africa out of the Cape, cage diving several years ago. And unfortunately, again, I think that the sharks get such crap, pardon my language, but they get so much harassment and bad press because of what we see on TV. And yet they're coming in, they're curious, they're looking at us, and you're in a cage, and it's pretty sensationalized. And yes, they are feeding them to attract them. They are eating machines. And yet to be there within arm's reach of a 20, 25-foot great white, holy mackerel. I mean, how cool is that? That's amazing.
Some people like to debate whether or not there's life on other planets and if aliens could ever make it to the Earth. And if they did, what would they look like? And I say, oh, they're here. I've seen them. Put on your scuba gear.
Watch Star Wars and some of the others. If you were to sit there and look at the critters the creatures that they've developed and then go underwater, it's like, oh, that's where they got that one. I get it. Avatar. Look at Avatar. So much diving stuff in Avatar, the creatures and the critters and so forth. They're taken from critters from underwater. That's where they've gotten all these great ideas.
Well, it's one of my favorite things about scuba diving is here are all these animals that are made to adapt and survive in an environment that is so completely foreign to us mammals,
Yeah.
And you go down in there and it's kind of like, wow, it doesn't even look like anything you can relate to.
No, it doesn't. And the sounds, I mean, you're at peace underwater. And I don't want this to sound so tranquil that people are going, oh God, yawn. It's not a yawner by any stretch. And I'll take you to the Galapagos Islands. Unbelievable. My wife calls it electronic diving. It is fish on steroids. It is just big critters, whole bunch of them. Been there a few times, cooler water, but you've got the little sea lions who are so curious and in your face, and the more you horse around and do somersaults, the more excited they get, the more they dart around. Or you get the squadrons of hammerheads or Galapagos sharks or the whale sharks that I mentioned earlier. That's stuff that you only hear, and again, you hear about it, you read about it, you see it in a movie. To go there, you can go there as a diver. And be on a boat 14 hours from the mainland in the sea doing your thing. I mean, how cool. I love that ability. You can see what Darwin saw back when, back in the day, hundreds of years ago, and see where he came up with his theory of evolution, which happened there. Wow, it's a privilege.
Sounds like neat stuff. So you've traveled a lot. You've seen a lot of stuff. You've told us about amazing places to go, and that's enough to make people want to dive, whether they're divers, if they're interested in the water or not. It's just the travel that would be fun.
It is. It's I don't know if getting there is any fun. We've had to struggle through airline changes over the years, but I have decided that's just part of the deal.
It's worth it.
You go to the airport, you get on the plane, and you sit down and watch a movie or read a book or two, and then you get there. And when they open the door and you feel that heat, the humidity, and you see the greenery and the people, you're into La La Land. And so you have this change that occurs. Everybody begins to smile. You can't help yourself but to smile. And then you frown. Everybody starts frowning the day they've got to go home. Then they get on their darn cell phones and start checking messages and emails and everything else. But it's a transformation, Kurt. It truly is.
Well, Scott, I can tell by your enthusiasm that you love what you do and you're doing what you love. What's it like? Tell our listeners out there, what's it like to be able to make a career out of an adventure sport doing something you really enjoy?
Oh, man, it's, well, I'm lucky duck. There you go. I mean, to be able to take professions that I've had in the past, military time. I did nothing heroic, served during the Vietnam era, though not in Vietnam happily, to be able to work with veterans through SCUBA. I'm a physical therapist, to be able to take my passion in working with people with disabilities, veterans, put them underwater on SCUBA, the therapeutic opportunities, as I've already talked about on the show. I am truly blessed, and I think that, and the recreational aspect of it in and of itself, to be able to take people, normal folks from day to day who want to change in life, or to put families together doing an activity that they can truly enjoy, to travel, to learn about geography and our world underwater, to learn about critters, to be able to talk about ecology. We do a lot of work with kids. We have some inner city kid programs that we do where we do a try scuba diving experience. We've taken them to the aquarium for that. We get other schools that will come in and do either a try scuba or a week of diving here at the store. I always tell these kids, I hope one of you saves the world someday. Because in order to be a marine biologist or an aquarist or an oceanographer or an astronaut, you have to scuba dive. You have to be a scuba diver. Sure. And so the doors that diving can open from young to old, able-bodied and disabled, how great is that? I keep saying how cool is that, but it is cool. And so I am blessed. I do enjoy what I do. I always jokingly say, people say, when are you going to retire? And I say, well, I kind of do what people retire to do. So as long as the brain and the body work, I'm not in any hurry to get out of Dodge.
Yeah, it sounds like you may have retired in 1984.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Well, that's fun. So I love this question. I haven't asked it for a few shows here, but you got to tell us about a time that things didn't go right when you were diving, and how you got through it, and advice that you might have for people that find themselves in a bizarre situation.
Sure, and it relates to air management. You've sort of addressed it already. When you're underwater, you become so engrossed in what's taking place that oftentimes, and you become energized and excited, and that relates to breathing rate and air consumption. And unfortunately, you can only stay down so long. There's only so much air in that scuba cylinder. So I've, unfortunately for me, found myself a couple of times, and I have to say this, I didn't practice what I preached.
Uh-oh.
So I ran out of gas in the car a couple of times too. So I wasn't monitoring my pressure gauge. One particular dive was in the Philippines. It was a night dive, and I saw stuff that I'd never seen before. And I'm filming with an underwater video camera thinking, well, this is National Geographic stuff. This is the best stuff ever. I should be on TV for all this. And I'm seeing octopus that are feeding, and blue-ringed octopus, and smoking coral, and it just went on and on and on. And all of a sudden I looked up and I didn't see anybody. My wife she had actually told me a few minutes before that she was going to take off and head back toward the boat. I went, go ahead. I'm filming. I'm going for it. All of a sudden, nobody around. So I started swimming towards shallower water, and I could see some dive lights. And I thought, okay, cool. And I got over close to the other divers, and another thing appeared underwater, and I'm just blown away by this magic that's happening. And suddenly, there's no divers around, and I took a breath. And you don't abruptly run out of air. That's the good thing,
right?
As you probably discovered. There's a warning. It's like the engine starts to sputter. Well, you start to breathe, and you have to draw a little bit harder and a little bit harder. That's the warning that, ruh-roh, you're low on air. And so I looked at my gauge, and yep, I was down to nothing. So I didn't panic. I got anxious, and I began my ascent. And we talk about ascending and not going too rapidly. I probably went a little faster than I should. To my good fortune, there she was, my wife of 45 years, hovering underwater, and I came up behind her. I spun her around, and I caught heck for this one. Spun her around, grabbed her alternate air source, put it in my mouth, and I was able to breathe safely and do what we call a safety stop. So I was then we ascended to the surface. I say that because it was a recent story from last year, and my wife doesn't forget those things. So I have been reminded on multiple occasions, and she bailed me out again. There, thank you, Lynn, for helping me. So it's hard to run. It's hard to run into trouble if you're prudent, if you follow the rules and watch the equipment. And, don't exceed your experience level. But it's easy to get mesmerized by all this stuff too. And then air consumption is probably I'd say one of the more often occurring problems that if people don't monitor their gas gauge.
Yeah.
But the good news is you hopefully have a buddy close by. You've learned how to share air with that buddy, and you can safely make that ascent to the surface. So here I am, having safely ascended.
And if you had to skip your safety stop and go onto the surface, odds are everything would have been fine.
Yeah, I didn't exceed my bottom time, we call it. So I was within my limits of not exceeding the time I should have spent underwater. I was just so engrossed, and my breathing rate, I know, exceeded my normal breathing rate just by virtue. This feeding octopus that you can't even imagine, I shot every angle imaginable, and I here to there and everywhere, and I was pretty excited by that. So I was within those limits, so I didn't have to suffer decompression illness.
Yeah. Well, for our listeners, I'm going to just do a real quick review of that stuff. Scuba diving within limits is a very safe, enjoyable activity. The dangers are if you went too deep for too long. But Scott, you know this, with an 80 cubic foot tank, unless you're a really aggressive diver, it's actually difficult to exceed those limits before you run out of air.
Yeah, it is. And you learn about those things during a class. So you read about it, you learn about time and depth, bottom time, you learn about why you don't exceed those limits. You learn about things called the bends. We hate to talk about scary things, but you have to talk about those things because by knowing it, you can prevent it and avoid it. And there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee you won't get injured in a car unless you don't get in a car. We always jokingly say there's only two guarantees where you couldn't get the bends. Don't dive. You can't get the bends if you don't dive, or don't come up.
Yeah.
Stay underwater. And yet, if you stay within the safety parameters, it's minuscule. It's not impossible. It is possible, but it's not quite very likely. So that relates back to those what-if drills that we go through in the learning process.
Well, and what it's really about is dissolved gases that are in the fluids of your body. And if you came up too fast, and those dissolved gases could come out of solution. But that's why we have the limits. That's why you do a safety stop even. That's exactly. Just in case any tiny little microbubbles are starting to form, they have a chance to dissipate. And it just dissipates through your lungs as you breathe. It's all very natural, painless stuff, right? So that's the first one is you don't want to go too deep for too long, but it's hard to do that with sport gear.
It is.
As I'm sure you know from listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, some of the safest and best snow conditions for backcountry skiing of the whole year happen in the springtime. And Bentgate has the gear you need. Come check out the latest in alpine touring, telemark, NTN, and splitboarding gear. They have brands like Black Crows, DPS, Dynafit, G3, Icelantic, K2, Technica Blizzard, Arc'teryx, Mammoth, Solomon, Volley, Neversummer, Jones, and BCA. And you do need to be safe out there. Bentgate has the latest in avalanche safety gear. They have beacons, airbags, shovels, and probes, and they're ready to help you educate yourself on snow safety. They also rent out gear, so you can get your skis and your boots there, as well as your avalanche safety equipment. What's more, they also have free demo ski days at local resorts so you can try out the latest gear. Now, how much fun does that sound? So swing by Bentgate in Golden, Colorado, or go to bentgate.com to find your new gear, as well as to get updates on all of their events. Check out bikeparts.com for all your cycling gear. They have a wide selection of over 60,000 bike parts and accessories. You can find everything you need, including tires, chains, tools, frame bags, cycling apparel, and even complete bicycles. They've got established brands like Shimano, SRAM, and Campagnolo, as well as the latest and greatest products from brands like Wolftooth, Physic, Zip, and Raceface. Need suggestions or have a question about what fits your bike? Their knowledgeable staff will answer any questions and get you rolling as quickly as possible. If you're in the great state of Colorado, stop by their full-service bike shop, Peak Cycles in downtown Golden. Check out bikeparts.com. The second one is don't hold your breath. Right?
Yeah, that's a biggie. That's actually the number one rule in scuba diving. Breathe continuously and not hold your breath. And of course, the result is if you were to fill your flexible lungs with air at depth, hold your breath, and begin to ascend, because of reduced pressure, the air in the lungs now expands. And if you were not to exhale, that expanding air could overexpand and, fill in the blank. Doesn't happen hardly ever, could happen. And that's why we drill people on always breathing. We even, one of the exercises learned in the pool and repeated in the open water is to remove and replace clearing your regulator while underwater. And one of the things that we emphasize as a motor movement is take a big breath, take your regulator, second mouthpiece out of your mouth, and whenever it's out of your mouth, you blow little bubbles. And the instructors know that if the student is not doing that, you tap them on the mouth. Doesn't mean you want to kiss underwater. Well, I guess it could, but in this case it doesn't. And so you tap them on the mouth and remind people to blow bubbles. So we are doing enough of those repeated skills in the pool and again in the open water that I think it becomes second nature.
Yeah, and that's what's important. And if you remember those two things, boy, there are other things that you learn in the class that are very valuable, but those are really the two big dangers right there.
I think so. I mentioned ecology and the environment. We spend a great deal of time encouraging people to not touch things, don't grab things, don't harass the critters, stay off the bottom, don't bump into the coral, because coral is a live animal. And every time you accidentally or intentionally bump into these things, you damage the reef. So we're trying to emphasize through diving and through teaching diving how to properly encounter the critters. It's like you go up to the mountains and you see the bear. Well, you don't jump out of the car and run over to the bear and harass the bear, because the bears may do something defensive. And that happens underwater. If you harass something underwater, the chances are you could get bit or stung or scraped, but it's a defensive mechanism. The animals underwater just don't attack. That's not what happens.
I was in Penningcamp, Florida, and I was trying to take a picture, and I was slightly buoyant, and I did the stupid thing. I put one finger under a little piece of coral to stabilize myself. I should not have done that. It was a bad wrong. But a week later, the skin fell off my finger.
Oh,
it was fire coral.
Nader.
I said, all right, now I know.
You're right.
Don't touch, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry to say I've done the same thing. People years ago we used to wear gloves, diving gloves or some sort of glove. That was the big thing, and oh boy, I wore them too. And then what happened is you felt bulletproof underwater, and I've got a glove on. I'm going to go touch and grab and feel this item underwater. Well, guess what? You just damaged or maybe killed that something. So as you already pointed out, now we're bare-fingered, and we try to be very conscientious and cautious. Then we don't get hurt.
Well, I tell you what, floating around or through the chasms of coral reef with every color of the rainbow, in the coral, all the different shapes, they're just so alien and new to us. The different types of fish, every shape, size, color. imaginable, and then all the creatures that you can't even identify. What is that? You know,
I know.
that is just what a great encounter. Man, how cool is that?
It's pretty cool, and little and big at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the reef's changed. I mean, global warming. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not here to state it as a fact. But through pollution and other overfishing, we can't deny that. There's been a decrease. I'm sorry to say I don't see the quantities of fish in the Caribbean, the Bahamas, that I did back in the day. It doesn't seem like unfortunately, there has been a tremendous amount of fishing, and that's too bad because now some of the cool critters I once saw in volumes, tons of them, we don't see to this day. And I think that's where the South Pacific comes in. When we go to Indonesia and Micronesia even, and the Philippines, it's different. The South Pacific, happily, still has a plethora of critters out there. But, some of it is our own doing, unfortunately. You talk about ecology, the shark finning, the disgusting, pathetic habit of cutting off shark fins for shark fin soup and then throwing carcasses underwater. I know, it's gross. Sorry, folks. Those are the things we're trying to educate people. Don't do that. And shame on them for doing it. Maybe a shark today, from a tourism standpoint, is worth thousands of dollars for people to see the live shark as opposed to the fins in a bowl of soup. And the soup, I am told, I've never tasted it, never will, has no taste. They have to add stuff to make it, to give it flavor. Isn't that crazy?
So it's going to taste like tomatoes and onions and paprika, maybe.
I don't know. It's just pathetic, though, when you think about it. So I think the divers, we are sort of the ambassadors to the underwater world. So we can go out and through our activity, through what we witnessed and experienced, we can go tell people, go do it. It's fun. It's enjoyable for all the reasons we talked about. And let's be careful out there. Let's take care of those reefs and those critters so that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren can also see them. And I'm not trying to sound heroic here. I'm just trying to use your common sense, and we can do that. I think we have that ability to do just that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't think I could have said it better. I've said this often before, but I think the best way to get people aware of taking care of this wonderful planet we live on is by getting them out into nature so that they become familiar with it and appreciate it and understand how fragile it is and how the ecosystems interrelate and, the symbiotic relationships and how all of these things have to come together for this beautiful, beautiful blue marble that we all, call home. It's getting people involved on that level that makes people understand and want to take care of it.
Agreed. But if you could see me now, I've got 2 thumbs up. I mean, right on.
So everyone ought to scuba dive, and the reason is
the whole world should scuba dive. Yes.
Absolutely. The water is the lifeblood of this planet, and when you understand that and you're a part of it, what a difference that makes.
Oh man! And before the show, you and I were talking, and I've sort of coined my own phrase. I've called water the great equalizer, and it doesn't matter how tall or short, your gender, your ability or your disability, water is magical. And from a diver's perspective, it truly is the great equalizer. I love that aspect of what it provides.
Yeah, and I'd like to throw out there, too, some people are uncomfortable in water because they never learned to swim very well, and they've had to fight to keep their head up, and they don't like the idea of holding their breath, and all of those things go away when you have scuba equipment.
It's true. We've had a number of people, are people with disabilities who they weren't great swimmers before they became disabled, and now they're going to go in the water on scuba as someone with limited mobility and this epiphany of, holy moly, look what I just did. I was free. I actually moved underwater. And I think it relates to good equipment and good instruction. And both exist today. And it's across the world. the training organizations, and all of them. I have to tip my hat to all of them. They do a really good job. It's methodical. It's logical. It's not rocket science by any stretch. And so it lets people experience this activity in a pretty succinct manner.
Oh, that's great. Well, Scott, we could go on for another 2 hours, and
God,
we need to get together sometime and do that.
I hate talking about this, Kurt.
I can tell.
Hey, can I give you my greatest experience?
Yes, please.
I got to give you just one last one.
Okay.
If I could. I just wrote it down. This year in October, and the USS Arizona, it relates to that. Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona will have been commissioned 100 years ago this October.
Wow.
I want to say the 17th, but sorry, folks, that might be wrong. And then on December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, this year will be the 75th anniversary. So 100th year from the commissioning, 75th year since the attack on Pearl Harbor. We have a very close relationship with the National Park Service, and in particular, there's a dive team for the NPS. This is their 100-year anniversary this year. They're celebrating their birthday this year. One of the primary people involved with the dive team invited last year my wife and I to join them on a dive expedition of the USS Arizona. And I mean, I still have to pinch myself to think that we actually got a chance to do this. And so we had been to the memorial before, and if you haven't, you got to go. It's the most emotional thing I think anybody could ever do. We got to go out to the Arizona 4 different days in a row and help set up for an underwater filming project that they were doing. And I have to tell you, to go underwater, it's not a beautiful wreck, and it's not meant to, I don't want to suggest it would be a beautiful wreck, but knowing what it symbolizes and knowing what took place underwater, it's just an amazing feeling. And to know that there are so many souls and left underwater from these people who sacrificed their lives on our behalf is pretty emotional. And to see some of the artifacts that are still left on that wreck was, I don't know, amazing experience for me. So when anybody asks me, what's your best one? Give me your best one. What's the best one that ever happened? That's it. Did it last year, and I feel blessed and privileged to have done it.
You know what? We should have you back on. You know why? Because we haven't talked about advanced certifications. We haven't talked about wreck diving. We haven't talked about cave diving. We haven't talked about a lot of things that scuba can lead to. So we'll have to have another show sometime, Scott, where we can get into some of those details.
I would appreciate it. And I really thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about scuba. For those of you that are divers, you've been nodding your head through a whole bunch of this. At least I hope you have been. I hope you haven't been shaking your head back and forth. And if you haven't, wherever you are, check it out. Go do a Discover Scuba Diving experience at your local dive center. Try it out. See what it feels like, and hopefully you'll start nodding your head and you'll agree with everything that I've just said. It's a wonderful activity. It's a great experience, whether as family or not. Do it. Give it a whirl, and I think you'll discover just how much fun this really is.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. And you can always get a hold of Scott at a1scuba.com. That's a1scuba.com, and they have a travel agency there. They have certification programs. They have a store that's full of all kinds of wonderful things. So a1scuba.com is where you can find Scott and learn more about all this.
Thanks. Thank you, Kurt. Been a blast.
Oh, it's a lot of fun, and thanks for your time today. And for all of our listeners out there, you know, I say it every show, but I mean it. Get out there and have some fun, because it might just change your life.
Until the next time, be sure to swing by and visit us on patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. If you become a patron of the show, you can be involved in our giveaways as well as all of the new content that we're going to put up behind the Patreon paywall. So we hope to see you there.